This is Green Street, the environmental health show. Patti and Doug Wood and our worldwide network of experts here every week to keep you up to date on what they're finding out about toxins in our environment and what you need to know to keep yourself and your family safe and healthy. Welcome back. This is part 2 of our show on wireless radiation, the invisible threat. In part 1, we heard the story of Ellie Marks, founder of the California Brain Tumor Association, and from Dr. David Carpenter of the University at Albany. In part 2, you'll hear from 2 more experts with different perspectives on the potential harm from exposure to wireless radiation. Here's part 2 of Wireless Radiation, the Invisible Threat. Now we turn to an expert on engineering, physics, and health. Dr. Paul Héroux is professor of toxicology and health effects of electromagnetism at the McGill University Health Center in Montreal and a founding member of the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields. As Dr. Héroux explains in this interview we did a few years ago, much of the research on RF radiation and human health was done originally by the military.
A lot of the people who were involved in the early studies on radio frequency radiation had their background in the military. The military have as their premise is that their duty is to protect the nation, and they recognize that electromagnetic radiation carried risks, but they were willing to accept them. The question is, should your daughter in the 4th grade in school accept the same risks as a pilot in an F-16? Or should you accept this risk of radiation, being exposed continuously to this radiation over 75 years? In the early days, you see, radiation was used in the military for a certain purposes, under certain circumstances, by a restricted group of people. Now, it's in the hands of everyone on the planet.
Most people assume that the government is testing all the cell phones, routers, antennas, and other wireless equipment that permeate our world, but they would be wrong. Manufacturers do the testing and verify that their equipment meets the 3-decades-old safety guidelines of the FCC. But do they say it's safe? Actually, they never say that. They can't.
In the 1930s, if you had $1 billion ship sailing the Atlantic, the only way to see that planes were coming to sink your ship was a pair of binoculars and a very awake mariner. But after radar, everything changed. And in fact, talking about the health effects of electromagnetic radiation in the United States was widely seen as unpatriotic because you had to win the race against the Soviet Union. So this is the context. Industry took the baton from the military. The military had such a love for electromagnetic radiation. Industry thought maybe we can get the same deal. And so essentially they used the military standards and they thought, let's push to get exactly the same thing by essentially maintaining that the only effect of this radiation is a thermal effect. This is scientifically absolutely untenable. And so no scientist who is worth his salt, who knows about biology as well as about microwave ovens, would defend this idea.
As Dr. Héroux mentioned earlier, the industry is desperately trying to hold on to the theory that the only effect of radiation from a cell phone is heat. But that theory is beginning to crumble under the scrutiny of some of the top epidemiologists in the country.
If you look at the demonstrated effects of this radiation, what are they? This will increase your risk of acoustic neuroma, and the ways in which these objects are assessed for the radiation that they inject in your brain have been done, I would say, not in a negligent way, but not with an eye of trying to assess the effects of radiation. And the second thing that is very deleterious about this radiation is that there's a lot of evidence that this radiation, when you apply it to biology, generates reactive oxygen species. And I know exactly how this happens. It's not a mystery. So when industry tells you that there are no mechanisms that we understand by which this radiation acts, it's a pure lie. This is totally inadmissible.
Reactive oxygen species. It's an unstable molecule, a free radical, and a buildup of these molecules in a cell can damage DNA and even cause cell death. That's how many scientists believe RF radiation causes biological harm, even at levels currently considered safe by the FCC.
Even the courts in the US have recently said that indeed, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, has not looked at the recent literature on this question. Why? Because they do not want to.
So, what about developing phones that emit less radiation, that are safer for people to use? Is it possible? And how would that work?
We have good friends in Brazil who are what I would call stellar quality electrical engineers. In other words, we have a number of electrical engineers in this group, and they looked at the literature and they looked at what could be done. They spent a lot of time doing simulations on where the energy from a cell phone ends up. And these brilliant people are telling us that with small modifications to the cell phone, you can make them radiate away from the head. Right now, most cell phone antennas are 3/8 lambda antennas, simply little wires, or are printed on a circuit board, these so-called inverted F and so on. They're simple shapes, but they tend to radiate electromagnetic energy in most directions. So what they're talking about are special types of reflectors that would block the radiation in one direction. And so the brain in particular would be protected in this way.
Dr. Héroux and his colleagues also raise questions about phones that are being optimized for artificial intelligence, so that the phone thinks for itself.
Maximizing the activity of a cell phone through artificial intelligence, that the cell phone thinks and acts by itself, not only relieves you of the command of your cell phone, it also generates signals that are under the control of others, and you are being irradiated under the control of others.
So as science continues its inexorable march toward a deeper understanding of how the radiation from cell phones and other wireless devices affects our body, a growing number of scientists, including Dr. Paul Héroux, are advocating for industry to address these growing concerns.
So what we're saying is, hands off our private identity and property. Do not irradiate us using the device that I paid for against my will. Even in airplane mode, some functions in cell phones are not deactivated. We want Airplane Plus, where we have a guarantee that we're not being irradiated. So then I can safely place this phone against my body without any fear. And if I happen to be an electrosensitive person, this object is now tamed for my use. No object in technology is perfect. However nice the cell phones are, they can still evolve. And we're not saying that people should not have cell phones. We're saying that the safety of this object should evolve with science, with the times, and become increasingly compatible with human biology. What we really want to happen is a real discussion. But industry, in a sense, has many, I would say, meters of advance over health. When you deploy technology, inevitably, it's much slower to find what the impacts of it are. What this means is that commercialized products take the elevator while science takes the stairs. So we have to catch up in a sense. And all we're trying to do in this group, ICD-EMF, is to protect your health. We don't have any interest in selling you anything. We just want to keep you safe and to make sure that you use the best telecommunications available.
This is Green Street, and you just heard from Dr. Paul Héroux, Professor of Toxicology and Health Effects of Electromagnetism at the McGill University Health Center in Montreal. Paul is also a founding member of the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields. You can learn more about that organization at its website, icbe-emf.org. Finally today, we turn to our friend Dr. Joel Moskowitz. Joel is the director of the Center for Family and Community Health at the School of Public Health at the University of California, Berkeley. He has conducted research on disease prevention programs and policies for more than 40 years, most recently focusing on adverse health effects of cell phone and wireless radiation. In a show we did last year, we asked Joel to comment on the study by the National Toxicology Program of the National Institutes of Health, which showed clear evidence of cancer in lab animals exposed to wireless radiation, and the response of the FDA and the FCC that the study findings didn't apply to humans. Here's Dr. Joel Moskowitz.
I think this just tells us that the telecom industry and the military are much stronger than pesticide industry and the food industry. Telecom industry alone spends over $100 million a year just lobbying at the federal level. Plus, they are active at the local and state level as well, ensuring that their interests are protected.
I'm interested in what the World Health Organization said, if anything, about the NTP study. I mean, it was a really well-designed study. I mean, just, they dotted every I and crossed every T. And then they had that panel of reviewers, afterwards that were independent and just said, the results are clear.
Yeah, it went through 3 days of peer review from some of the world's leading experts before they published 2 massive technical reports, the NTP did.
Right.
I don't know whether the WHO has taken an official position on the study. Their partner, ICNIRP, though, ICNIRP,
right,
has basically dismissed the study along with the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, IEEE.
On what grounds?
Because they're dismissing it, claiming that the exposures were full-body exposures. It's unlike how people get exposed to this high level of radiation. The interesting thing is they've ignored essentially a replication study done by the Ramazzini Institute in Italy.
Which, at the same time.
Yeah, which basically found the same kinds of cancer risk in male rats as the NTP study, using a much, much lower intensity exposure of radio frequency radiation, cell phone radiation.
Coming off antennas, right?
That's right. So it's much better simulation of cell tower exposure in that study.
Right.
So it seems like we got 2 things going on. First, we have this giant international powerful industry that's making billions of dollars, but using a technology that we know can be harmful. And we've got solid evidence of biological harm, but the disease endpoints associated with exposure to RF radiation have this long latency period. And, those cancers could be caused by, any number of other things. So it's an easy way for the industry to kind of skate away from any responsibility. But they know it. They know it. They know the science. They know the studies.
But just as an example, I mean, there is an understanding in the medical community by, I'm sure, more than this one doctor at Sloan Kettering, but we knew someone who had a parotid gland tumor, and he eventually died within a year because it spread everywhere. But when he went to Sloan Kettering, which was the second hospital he was in for a second opinion, the surgeon said to him immediately, he said, this is a cell phone tumor.
Yeah, parotid gland, by the way, is also the salivary glands.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The salivary gland that sits right below the ear.
Yeah.
Yeah, regarding another area that requires more concern is the thyroid gland. And there are 2 papers from a Yale Medical School study.
Mm-hmm.
First found a slightly elevated thyroid cancer risk among the long-term cell phone users. Then they did a follow-up study looking at genetic profiles of the individuals in the study, and they found that genetic susceptibility increases that association significantly. So it appears that wireless radiation may affect some people more than others, depending on their genetic makeup. So this is a very complicated area of study because there's a lot of factors that come into play.
I wanted to ask you about this because genetic susceptibility is something that is really hard to figure out. I mean, I've always wondered why some people are affected so deeply and seriously by exposure to RF radiation, those people who have a particular sensitivity to it. But it's not everybody. And so those people who are very sensitive are often dismissed as, being crazy because other people don't feel it. And I'm wondering if you have an opinion on why that is that some people are so sensitive and others are not.
We have different genes. I mean, not everyone who smokes 3 packs a day of cigarettes gets lung cancer.
That's right.
There's genetic susceptibilities to various injuries or insults on our bodies. What we haven't talked about is a number of people increasingly are being affected from acute exposures to these forms of wireless radiation or even power line frequencies. And it's estimated that 3 to 5% of the population suffer from a syndrome called electromagnetic hypersensitivity, or EHS.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an environmental intolerance, which could result in headaches, memory impairment, fatigue, insomnia, ringing of the ears, or tinnitus, heart palpitations, a variety of symptoms. And this condition is controversial because it's very difficult to diagnose, and physicians aren't trained in how to diagnose such things. But according to Physicians Weekly, it's called a clinical syndrome characterized by the presence of a wide spectrum of nonspecific multiple organ symptoms. And many patients appear to have impaired detoxification systems that become overloaded by excessive oxidative stress. And talking to clinicians who treat patients who have EHS, they say many of them originally had multiple chemical sensitivity, or vice versa. Their patients with EHS develop multiple chemical sensitivity. So it becomes a generalized response to a variety of environmental agents, including chemical agents as well as electromagnetic agents that causes this syndrome. And increasingly, I think we're hearing more and more people develop this as we become exposed in our daily lives to more and more forms of wireless radiation. This is very unfortunate because it's really hard to get it diagnosed or treated currently.
We certainly are hearing more and more people who are developing sensitivity. And
Right, and we know people who have gone to Green Bank, West Virginia.
The canaries in the coal mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
exactly.
we're all electrically sensitive. It's just a matter of some of us are more sensitive than others.
Yeah.
And so this is stressing all of our bodies, not just those who experience these symptoms and affected by this syndrome.
So, Joel, let me ask you this question. Given what you know, are you hopeful for the future? Are you optimistic about whether science is going to eventually win this argument? And
I think science ultimately will win, but we may all be dead before it happens. It's a very long process. I mean, we're still fighting the tobacco war.
Yeah, we are.
In more than half a century now.
Yeah.
And it's morphed into an electronic cigarette war. And so nicotine addiction is still a major problem, and the consequences of that addiction is still a major problem. I spent most of my career dealing with the tobacco war.
Okay, so that didn't turn out so great, not so far. But, we're working on a couple of different projects. One is the Tech Safe Schools project. And, it's really hard to get parents to get behind this because they are also addicted to their wireless technology. And it is an incredibly addictive obsession. People can't put it down. They have to check it every couple of minutes, if not more often than that. It's a really tough one. I mean, it's a really tough one to try to get anybody to think about the potential harm, the potential risk, even when it involves their children or their grandchildren, because they themselves are addicted and they're just in denial.
Well, there was a period with regard to cigarettes back in the 50s and early 60s when half the population was addicted to that substance, and it was very difficult to talk to them about giving up cigarettes. And there was also a period of time where people were resistant to seatbelts in cars. And the industry fought it tooth and nail, putting seatbelts and then airbags. And now it's become a marketing ploy to have safer vehicles. So looking at this from an optimistic lens, perhaps we'll get to a point where the industry will start marketing safer technology and the public will want to respond favorably to safer products. The ICBEMF has been promoting ALARA, which means keep it as low as reasonably achievable. And that's, I think, a good guideline for all of us, is that we should minimize our exposure to these forms of radiation, be they Wi-Fi or cellular or Bluetooth, and reduce the risk of harm by adopting a variety of behaviors to minimize these exposures. For example, using a landline whenever possible, or secondly, remembering that distance is your friend, keeping your devices 10 inches from your body as compared to 1/10 of an inch actually results in a 10,000-fold reduction in the exposure. It's the inverse square law. So keep your phone away from your head and body, store it in a purse or backpack, and text or use a wired headset or speakerphone for your calls if you're going to use a cell phone. Thirdly, cell phones are programmed to increase the exposure to radiation when the reception is poor. So you should only use your phone when the signal strength is strong and avoid using it in an elevator or a vehicle because metal structures can interfere with the signal. And finally, another simple thing you can do is turn off all your wireless devices at bedtime, including your Wi-Fi router. But better yet, use wired connections, not Wi-Fi, because cable, Ethernet, or optical fiber are much faster, they're more secure and safer than 4G or 5G cellular. So there's a variety of things that individuals can do to reduce their risk. But we're also promoting the industry doesn't have to wait on government to take action, because the governmental agencies have been co-opted by the industry and are protecting them. But some of the industry might be able to get an advantage by marketing safer technology.
You're listening to Green Street, the Environmental Health Show, and our show today has been about wireless radiation and human health. You just heard from Dr. Joel Moskowitz, Director of the Center for Family and Community Health at the School of Public Health at UC Berkeley. For those of you who want more information about wireless radiation, we have a lot of resources on our various websites. Our primary website is grassrootsinfo.org, and you can go there, and under Common Exposures, you'll find pages about cell phones, smart meters, wireless antennas, and so on. Again, that site is www.grassrootsinfo.org. For parents of kids in school who are concerned about the amount of radiation that exists in the typical classroom these days, or for those whose children are exhibiting symptoms of electromagnetic radiation syndrome, please visit techsafeschools.org. You'll find a lot of scientific studies there, as well as resources you can use to help inform school administrators. Again, that website, www.techsafeschools.org. If you're concerned about 5G antennas going up in your neighborhood, I strongly encourage you to visit the website of Americans for Responsible Technology on the web at americans4rt.org. Americans, the number 4rt.org. The toolkit on that website has literally dozens of things you can download and use to help push back against the unfettered deployment of wireless antennas in your community. And finally, if you or someone you know is pregnant, let's make sure we keep any wireless device away from that developing baby. To hear medical doctors talk about why this is important, just log on to babysafeproject.org, where you can download a free brochure and see the joint statement that's been signed by almost 500 medical and scientific professionals from around the world, calling for extreme caution when it comes to exposing a developing baby to wireless radiation. Again, that's babysafeproject.org. That's going to do it for our Green Street Show today. Special thanks to our friends Ellie Marks, Dr. David Carpenter, Dr. Paul Héroux, and Dr. Joel Moskowitz. They make all of our work possible. Patti and I will be back next week with another edition of Green Street. Thanks for listening.